Time to smash it up on a Monday night. We're back in the time slot. Everything is A-OK alongside managing editor of Warchant.com, Ira Schofel. My name is Tom Lang, and you're tuned in to the Monday Smash, presented by State Farm agent Russ Forhis. We'll tell you more about Russ as the show goes along. As you're making your way into the proceedings tonight, hit the like button underneath the video because we're talking Noles football on a week where we get to see, or I should say the media gets to see, Noles football up close and personal. Tonight we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the NFL Combine. But Ira, how's it going on a Monday night?
It's going good, man. Yeah, it's almost here. I mean, it's really kind of these last 2 months have really flown by. We kind of lamented during the month of January and February that usually from a content standpoint, the pace of news, things used to be a little bit slower. Usually could kind of breathe a little bit after a season, getting ready to get into, spring practice in March, but we didn't get that option this year because of between the lawsuit with the ACC and FSU and then all the transfer portal news. And it just seems like it's been with the Alabama thing with Mike Norvell. It was one thing after another. The downside of that is, your boys never really got much of a break. The good side of it is it really flew by. I can't believe we're going to go to tour of duty this week, see what those guys look like at the tour of duty. I think there's 14 or 15 newcomers that we're going to get to see. Well, no, I think it's actually more than that. When you think of between the transfers and early rollies, it's probably over 25 or so newcomers, the returning guys, and then we'll have spring break, and then we come right back from that, and we're into spring practice. So, man, it's these last 2 months flew by really, really fast.
They did, and the news is good across the board, Ira, when you're talking about either Florida State football for the new guys, the roster turnover, the new guys, or the ones that did participate in Indianapolis. And I see Elise, thank you very much for the comment. She says, Noles killed the Combine. Yeah, I would say we could go through a lot of these players, Ira. We talked about it and set it up last week. There were some results creeping in. Braden Fiske was an early headliner. Kalen DeLoach made headlines with a sub 4.540 on Thursday night when we spoke last. But I'm going to give you the floor, man. One Johnny Wilson ran a 4.52, and I believe we had been talking about how he's faster than you think, people. Straight ahead speed, he's faster than you think. But please take your victory lap. Go ahead.
No, it wasn't just me. Both of us. I mean, that was the thing that we talked about last week on the Thursday Smash or Wednesday Smash, whatever it was, ended up being that, people think that he's a plotter for some reason, and he's not. I mean, he is an athletic, fast dude, especially for that size. And, I thought that was great for him. And I think it looked like he looked good in the gauntlet drills as well. It looked like his hands looked good. So, and he had a really good Senior Bowl week of practices. So he's a guy, I think he's as big a wild card as there is in this whole class of Florida State guys. Cause, he's not as polished as Keon Coleman. He wasn't as productive as Keon Coleman, but his measurables are off the charts. And, this is one where I think if Al Davis was alive, we may see Johnny Wilson go in the first 5 picks.
Yeah,
of this draft.
He would want two people: Worthy because he runs a 4.2, and then Johnny because he's got the longest wingspan in the measured era of these receivers. He runs a 4.52. A lot of the measurables do come out and look like Mike Evans. The comps, the vertical is identical. The 40 is nearly identical. The height, the wingspan. And I got to tell you, Ira, you're right. The videos of the Senior Bowl and the route running, the way he got out of his breaks and made guys look silly, Johnny has done a lot for himself. He's made himself a lot of money in his college career, but then in the short period of time after the season, he's made some more money for himself. So good news for him, good news for several other Noles. I'm going to go to a guy that maybe we didn't talk about enough coming into the Combine as a draft prospect. We should be now. Trey Benson ran a sub 4.40, Ira. We knew he was fast.
Yeah.
I didn't think he could do that at that height. That puts him up there with a lot of the physical freaks in Florida State history, Ira, to be that size and run that quickly. Should we maybe have talked about Trey Benson a little bit more before the Combine process? Because I feel like we focused on a bunch of other dudes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's natural, though. Running back has just become so undervalued from an NFL position. When I was a kid, not when you were a kid. When I was a kid, you weren't even born. But when I was a kid, running back was a huge position in the draft, and you might see numerous backs. I mean, you'd see a lot of backs go in the first round, and it's just kind of gone away from that. So I think from that standpoint, and the fact that it's not like he's an all-time great back. I mean, he was a really good back at Florida State, a very good back. He had some great games, but he's not at the Dalvin Cook Warrick Dunn level. So I don't think a lot of us were, just focused on him. But you're right, man. At his size and his ability, and then you add in putting those speed numbers up, and he's a really just likable kid. I could see teams really falling in love with him. Trey Benson might be as likable a football player as I've ever covered. And so that's going to translate in those interviews as well. And you'd say, well, this is a business. They don't care about. They do. I mean, they're influenced by personalities, what guys are like, what guys are going to be like in the locker room. And I think he's one of several of these Florida State guys that's really going to benefit from that aspect.
Well, and then also it's not just about the straight ahead speed, the broken tackle rate from 2 seasons ago, especially. Like, he was always good at being elusive, but from 2 years ago, it was the elite of the elite in broken tackles. That was a better offensive line that he had, at least specific to the ground game for Florida State. So it'll be interesting to see what Trey's career looks like. I'm also fascinated, Ira. I don't know if this is more shocking or not than Trey's 40 number. But I didn't know Jarrian Jones was that fast. I knew he had closing speed. I had no idea he was sub 4.4 himself. That was a stunner to me. But he made himself some serious money between his workouts after the season and his late season film, but then his workouts after the season and then the combine. Jarrian Jones should very well be drafted now, and I'm not sure that was a lock when the season ended.
Yeah, and I wrote about him, particularly a little bit in the column I wrote today. To me, he was a guy that I thought really good college football player, but I just didn't know how much they would value him because I didn't know how well he tests. He's not a huge dude, and I didn't know he would test that fast. But man, I take it all back. I mean, when you and that's where I think sometimes we could talk about the combine being overvalued or overrated. You'll see people on Twitter over the weekend say things like, "Well, just a reminder that the combine doesn't really translate to success in the draft or success in the NFL or whatever," and that's all fine. But when you've been a productive player and you've got measurables and you run really, really well, man, and you've got a good personality and you've got a good, they get good feedback from the coach. I mean, there's just not a lot of knocks on some of these guys. And he's a perfect example. He had an incredibly productive last year or two for Florida State. And then to run that time, man, it's there's just not going to be a lot of knocks on him. And then, the way Mike Norvell talks him up, they've really built a really close relationship. Because look, there's a time when he and Fabian Lovett came from Mississippi State to Florida State early on. I'll tell the story now. There's just between me and you, Tom.
All right. Yeah. Nobody else. Everybody cover your ears.
So I think it was the first trip to Jacksonville. I think it was the first trip they took over to Jacksonville. He had broken his hand in camp or before camp, or right before camp, I think. And he was sitting out of camp, and one of the strength coaches was just killing him. And we were behind the fence, and they just happened to be near us. And one of the strength coaches was just giving him a hard time about not practicing. And he's trying to explain, look, man, my hand's broken. I can't practice. The doctors told me I can't practice. And the strength coach was basically like, no, man, you can practice if you want to practice. You're choosing not to practice because you don't want to be out here for camp. You think you're just going to show up basically the last week before the season starts and get to play, but that's not how it works. And it was interesting to watch this guy really kind of come down on, and in Jarrian, it was clear that they felt he needed that. That wasn't just a random occurrence. Like, clearly, I'm sure that coach had been given instructions to kind of be on top of him. And there were different parts during, Jarrian's first couple of years where, I don't know if they knew how it was going to turn out, but man, something just triggered midway through his 4 years at Florida State. And he's again, people will talk about guys who transferred, and did Florida State really develop him? Jarrian Jones was developed at Florida State. He was here for 4 full years, and he's seeing the fruits of that labor.
It's a great point. A lot of these guys are late bloomers, and I think late bloomers is a synonym term for development, program development, because I can, when they released the 2 deep after fall camp and Jarrian was named the starting nickel, the slot back instead of Greedy Vance, I was stunned. I was stunned that was the case, because Greedy had what I thought was a pretty good camp, and I was wondering what that was about. By the end of the season, you're like, oh, well, no, duh. Jarrian was built for that role. He was made for that role. But you think about the things that Jared Verse has said about the program. Trey Benson has talked about how Florida State changed his life. You see the development from Jarrian Jones at the linebacker position, Kalen DeLoach. And with that 40 time, And you saw the development from a kid who was confused an awful lot a couple of seasons ago to somebody who could undercut a throw in zone coverage because he understood what the offense was doing to him. Moments like that across the board where players were made better, either stronger because of Coach Storms or better football players because of their position coaches. Like, I think a lot of football people this weekend, Ira, said, you know what, Florida State was actually pretty good. And like, we're over here waving our arms violently saying like, of course they were.
Yeah.
How could they have been as banged up as they were and go undefeated, like go 13-0 and be in a position to be in that Final Four? I think people are starting to figure that out, which is only good for the reputation and the pitch that Mike Norvell and his staff can make moving forward.
Yeah, 100%. I think that, again, it's just more validation. And it's validation for, like you said, Josh Storms and Mike Norvell. And Mike Norvell has had a lot of success as a college football coach. Obviously had a ton of success at Memphis, and he had several guys at Memphis went on to the NFL, guys who were kind of sleepers that maybe weren't recruited by the Florida States even, or the Georgias or Alabamas, but Mike Norvell got them, found them places to play in his offense, and they've had NFL careers. But really, since they've been at Florida State, there hasn't been a ton of NFL production. The one year, I think it was the second year when Janaris Robinson and they had three or four guys go, Asante Samuel and some of those guys that went. So, but the other 3 years, I think it's just been one guy every year. And last year was just Jamie Robinson. And that's not a reflection on Mike Norvell. He had just gotten here and it was rebuilding the roster. But it was kind of like the last missing piece, I feel like, kind of to his resume. Like when he's talking to recruits, that, we talked about a little bit last week, is it's just going to be good for these coaches to have those guys on their wall, pictures of the guys that they sent to the NFL on their wall. And hey, I coached him. I can do that for you. That's a big deal, man. So it's really big for recruiting, I think. And again, Mike Norvell was really praising Josh Storms on Twitter over the weekend, selling Josh Storms, kind of selling him to recruits. Like, hey, if you come here, you're going to get to work with this guy. He's going to make you better, and it's going to help you out in the long term.
Which is why we're all excited for the tour of duty on Thursday morning, because you can see the work that Josh Storms has helped. The players had to make the decision themselves, but the plan that Josh Storms has put in action in this offseason for a lot of players who are looking for starting jobs. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but Ira, you've got a feature up on warchant.com. You released it earlier, but it's 5 takeaways from the combine and what you saw, what you heard, things surrounding it. For me, it was that vindication feeling like, yeah, no crap. Florida State is really good. Wish you people would have gotten on board with it. And if you watched them, you would know how good they were. And this wouldn't be a stunner to you. But I'm wondering if you've got a takeaway that maybe you didn't share today on the Jeff Cameron show, or one that you think that people would enjoy here tonight on the Smash.
Yeah, it actually was a comment, I would say a comment that one of our longtime message board posters, Seminole72, he responded in the thread when I posted my story. And it was something that I probably took for granted, and I think we all take for granted, but I think it's a valid point. We touched on it earlier. He brought up the fact of how well those guys all kind of represented the program during their interviews. A lot of those videos were either up on social media or on YouTube. We put some of them with stories on our website as well. But I hope people got to see it, because again, these are ambassadors for Florida State. Their shirt might say WR04 or whatever, but everybody knows whose program they represent. And I thought across the board, I mean, Jared Verse was awesome. He was talking passionately about how he regretted, not playing in the Orange Bowl, and maybe, if he could do it over again, he would have. And, the way Trey Benson said that they changed me as a player, you could go back and watch the film of me before. Jared Verse said that, watch the film of me before. Trey Benson, I think, said it was the best decision he's ever made. So those guys, man, you can't, for a program, obviously fans love to see it. Fans eat it up. But more, as much as anything, it's just huge for recruiting. And again, I think all of this is, just further accentuates the sales pitch, and so when these kids are on campus, Florida State's going to have a big recruiting this weekend. In fact, I just put a story that Matt Lasser wrote on a receiver, Khalil Lockett, I think out of Texas, who's the number 3 wide receiver in the country, who's coming to visit Florida State this weekend. Recruiting is opening back up this weekend in person. And this guy, one of the things what was interesting to me was one of his quotes to Matt was, when Keon and Johnny, basically he said when Keon and Johnny were healthy, the offense was electric. And he said, and they still had a great year, even though they had some injuries. well, how the hell does this kid know about their injuries? Like none of that was reported, but clearly Ron Dugans and Mike Norvell had said, man, you thought they looked good, right? Well, imagine if they had been healthy, because neither one of those guys was even healthy for much of the year. And so that's, again, now they see those guys run those good times, get all this coverage on the NFL Network. I mean, again, it just elevates your program.
Florida State is on that short list now. They've done it. And one thing, Ira, that was remarkable to me, talked about it today earlier on the live show. Mike Norvell was able to do this coming out of COVID, so he's behind. He didn't get the benefit of that first year like a lot of coaches do when there's newness. You know, he'd been around. There was losing that happened because there were barriers in recruiting. The portal is a huge key to this all. There's no doubt about that. But that Coach Norvell didn't take too many risks in terms of culture. Like, you know, this guy, we need this guy to win, but I don't know what's going to happen along the way. Like the way that they were able to arrive at this moment where if you were to do a piece or we were just to speak out loud, how many dudes did they send to the combine next year? That's over 10 as well. It's going to be well over 10 next year as well. It's remarkable that he got here the way he did and keeping the culture intact. Sometimes the easy answer is not the right answer for the long term of the program. He somehow navigated and got this thing to be a winner by doing both. Culture fits, but then also guys that they could win with and guys that they could see that needed development, and they found a way to develop them and turn them into pros.
I mean, I think it's the smart way to go. You know, again, you can take shortcuts, and that was one of the things that he said. If you go back to Norvell's comments in the second year, his big speech when Corey asked him, "What is he telling recruits?" when they were 0-4 in year two, and he one of the things he said, and he said it repeatedly, was, you know, we're going to get back and we're going to do it the right way, and we're going to do it in a way that we can have lasting power. And what he's talking about there is there have been many coaches. I mean, you look at what was our guy at Auburn, Gene Chizik. Mm-hmm. You look at Urban Meyer, but really all of his stops, tremendous success, but no staying power because it just kind of things started going out of whack. I mean, there was no accountability. There was no a lot of the things we saw towards the end of Jimbo Fisher's tenure. Again, Jimbo could have been an all-time great college football coach. That's not going to happen now. I mean, there's almost no way that happens now. His legacy is tarnished because he didn't sustain it at Florida State, and then he didn't have success at Texas A&M. He may resurrect his career somewhere else, but I don't think that's ever going to change kind of how he's viewed. And so to when you say that, I think that's the smart approach. Now, you might get fired in the process. You might get fired trying to build it, the right way. Mike Norvell did have the luxury of having the transfer portal, and that's a big advantage that a lot of schools didn't have that option. And he was smart to jump into it and do a great job with it. It might have been too much to overcome. The hole he inherited, the abyss that he took over after Jimbo's last couple of years and those 2 years under Willie, maybe he couldn't get out of it without the transfer portal, but he used it and it paid off.
Well, now it's a linchpin of the sport, not just the way Florida State's path, but they've got their system down, and it's the envy of most, if not all, programs in America. We're going to get to your question. Go ahead.
I want to mention one comment, Brett. I saw a comment from Brett in the chat, Brett Taylor, about Jimbo used to have that picture that they put out on social media of all the defensive players and how they all had been drafted and where they went. And I think it even put in like how much money they each made in their contracts and all that is a recruiting pitch. And that's a great point. I think Jimbo got in a little bit of trouble because he tried to use it at Texas A&M, and I think Jalen clapped back at him on social media about it, like, "Hey, man, I didn't play at Texas A&M." But no, that's exactly it, and it's such a big part of how they choose, how recruits choose colleges. We want to know: are you gonna what? And a perfect example, and it doesn't apply now. Right now, we'll see how it all plays out. Dexter Carter, his son Devin, committed. He's a 2026 kid. He committed over a year ago, and he's since decommitted and opened things back up again. But that's what Dexter Carter said. And Dexter Carter's an FSU guy, was a star here, first round draft pick. But he said he was really concerned about Devin signing with Florida State because they had not produced NFL wide receivers, and he wants his son to be an NFL wide receiver. Now, he thought that they were heading in the right direction, and I think they're heading in the right direction. But man, you can't underestimate how important these next two drafts are going to be for really kind of get people are wanting the high school recruiting to hit that elite level. I think this might be the final piece of it.
I agree with you. It's getting there. Z-Chan, amazing. Thank you so very much. I'm going to get to you in just a moment. It was great to see you this weekend at the wedding and the proceedings, both the cocktail hour on Friday and then the wedding on Saturday. But this is part of the quiet part out loud stuff you can say in the NIL era too. You know, what Alabama's finding out when Nick Saban retires and departs is that from an NIL standpoint, there's no discount anymore. There's no, you're coming to play for Nick Saban and this is a discount because you're going to make so much more money in the long run. You know, DeBoer's got to get up there, and people in Tuscaloosa are talking right now of their collective game has to get stronger. The better you get in this regard, the less expensive it is to keep your roster together, to retain players, to acquire players. And this is a part of the process. If Mike Norvell continues down this path, your dollars go farther as you're trying to build and sustain a roster in that all-important collective space as well. And so the benefits are just all over the place if you can continue to do this and be a pro factory, which I think they're going to be.
No, that's a great point. And I mean, you think about there's been NFL teams where certain offenses maybe have been really productive, or certain defenses have been really good. And a player will say as a free agent, I want to go be in that system because that's what it's going to do for my next contract. Or maybe I'll sign a 1 or 2 year deal there because I know it's going to pay off with a bigger deal later. And yeah, man, I think, for a guy like Keon Coleman, when he came on the market and Florida State was the school he chose, he might have wanted as much from, NIL that he could get at Florida State as he might be able to get at some other schools. But you wonder if maybe there's going to be guys who are willing to even take less, if Florida State continues to have success like that.
Yeah, because the big money is still on Sundays. Now, who knows? Maybe 10 years from now, there's more money like for coaches like it is for them. Maybe that's the way it is with the college football, the NIL sphere. Not quite yet, though. Z-Chan, the official DMD of Warchant TV. Tom and Ira, everybody looks at Atkins as the first coach to leave to take a head coaching job. Do you ever see Fuller doing that? First of all, thank you very much for the contribution. It's a massive one. Thank you, Z-Chan. And Ira, I mean, what do you think? Does Adam Fuller strike you as head coach material? Do you think he has aspirations to be one in the near future?
Thanks, Z-Chan. And real quick, Tom, it's just what a small world this is. So, and I've talked, I think Z-Chan has told me this before, but he reiterated this weekend. I guess I'd forgotten about it. I might've been too drunk the first time he told me, but he actually married into a family that I used to coach. His wife was the brother of a kid I used to coach back in Thomasville back, 25 years ago. So it's a small world, buddy. It's a shout out to the Duncans. They're great people.
Well, that's Tallahassee, Thomasville. I mean, you know everybody at some point along the way, or you know somebody who knows somebody, and that the wedding had those that kind of
those connections,
which was great. And we'll review the wedding in just a little bit, but go ahead.
I think it's possible. I don't know that either one is itching to go. I think the difference between college coaching now versus, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, there used to be a huge gap between head coach salaries and assistant coach salaries. And quite honestly, when Mickey Andrews retired in 2009, towards the last, that's not that long ago. It's 13 years ago, 15 years ago now. That towards the last couple of years of his career, he made kind of real money. He made like maybe $500,000 a year because Jimbo had come in, and Jimbo wanted to make $500,000 or $600,000 a year as a coordinator. So that's what Mickey Andrews basically kind of got something similar. But before that, in the from the 90s to the mid 2000s, guys like Mickey Andrews were making $250, maybe high 200s. They weren't making a fortune. And so there was a real desire to become a head coach, because if you become a head coach, you might make 10 times that. You might make 8 times that. And there was kind of a ceiling on assistant coach. But now assistant coaches make so much freaking money that if you're Adam Fuller, you're making over $2 million a year. Adam Fuller makes $2 million a year to coach football. And he's got another, 5 years on his contract, 4 or 5 years on his contract. So he's guaranteed to make $8 or $10 million coaching defense. So the question becomes, how bad do you need to be in charge? How badly do you have that quest, that fire to be running a program and seen in that light? And, have at it if that's what you want. But man, there's something to be said for being an awesome defensive coordinator, having players you love, you get a lot more hands-on, as a coordinator, you get a lot more hands-on interaction with players than the head coach does. You don't have to deal with a lot of the BS the head coaches deal with. So I just don't think those guys are in a huge, huge rush. Could I see it? Yeah. I can see it with either one of them. And I certainly could see it with Adam Fuller. If he does, I just haven't got the sense that he desperately desires to be a head coach. And
Yeah.
I know Atkins wants to be a head coach. I've had that conversation with Alex Atkins. I know he wants to be a head coach, but I also know he's not in a huge rush. He's a young guy.
The thing too, when you're doing the math on not just your salary, but then also, your situation, is Adam Fuller's going to have a lot of good players to coach. Like this was the conversation last year. I remember having this a bunch in the preseason. Like in defense of Adam Fuller, he didn't have a defensive line 2 seasons ago. So I don't know exactly how much you expect him to do when you're thin on the defensive line or guys are hurt. Like your secondary doesn't look as good if you don't have a good defensive front. It's amazing how good corners and safeties look when you've got Jared Verse and you got Braden Fiske and you got players like that. Adam Fuller is in line, Ira, to have a lot of really freaking good football players over the next 3 to 5 years of his career. That's got to be part of the consideration as well.
Yeah, and it gives you an opportunity to show what you can do as a coordinator. Because again, like last year, you think of when you can get pressure with your front four, suddenly you can have a lot more fun as a coordinator than if you've got to bring 6 guys every play because you have no prayer of getting pressure otherwise. And they've become a destination place. We talked about it on offense, but it kind of happened on defense too, man. Those defensive ends they brought in are pretty big time. And from Marvin Jones to Lolo Hea to the guy from West Virginia, I can't remember. Durjaye. Those are legit, very promising defensive linemen. And then with the guys you already have, Patrick Payton and Josh Farmer and Daryl Jackson up front. So, man, he can have a lot of fun as a coordinator here. Again, if somebody, I think Adam Fuller, to me, he's at a place now with what they did defensively last year and what they've got coming in the pipeline, all the talent they've got in that secondary. If I'm Adam Fuller, I'm wanting a school to come find me. Like, I'm not wanting to go apply for the BC job or go apply for, some mid-tier kind of job. I mean, have somebody, come pursue him. Because if you do it for long enough and have success for long enough, like Brent Venables or some of those guys, they will come find you. And now you get a much better situation than just applying for head coaching jobs.
Yeah, personality wise too. I think he's fit for it in this sense. He's a junkie for it. He lives it. He loves it. This is sometimes in that kind of off the record time we have with him in the luncheons, but I don't think he would mind sharing that he loves film. Like he loves to be in his lab and finding out what the next thing is that he can do and integrate into his schemes, into his philosophies, wrinkles he could put out there in a game day, save stuff for later. Like he lives it and he breathes it. He told me it's hard to get in the car and leave some days. Like I'm excited to go to my family, but there's always that feeling of just there's a little bit more we can do. That is a trait that a head coach has to have. So I think he's got the material. It's just a matter of if he has the will to do it. Caleb James in the chat, thank you very much for the contribution. He says, Jeff and Ira, and he corrects it later saying Tom and Ira, sorry. None of us wants to watch the Georgia game again, but did you happen to zero in on Daryl Jackson? And what was your evaluation of his play? Any thoughts, Ira? You were in the building.
Yeah, no, I do have thoughts. And I think there are a lot of people, if that was the only time you've seen Daryl Jackson play, you'd be sitting there thinking, and I know I heard from some of these people, that's what we were all excited about. But man, I would just encourage you and caution you, and Tom can vouch for this as well, that to remember that was a really ridiculous situation he was thrown into. He had not played football in over a year. All he did was practice. He gets thrown into a game where those guys knew what they were walking into. I mean, they might have played with some energy early on, especially Kalen DeLoach and a couple of those guys really brought a lot of energy into that game, hoping that they could kind of prove the world wrong. But man, they knew what was going to happen in that game. So defensive football is so much about trusting everybody else to be in their gaps, to know what they're going to do, that I know if I do my job, the guy next to me is going to do his job, the guy behind me is going to do his job. And I'm not making excuses for them. But when you lose that and you go into a game where you're starting a bunch of freshmen and dudes who've never really played, and you're a guy who's never really played before at Florida State, I just don't think you can evaluate him. So I did not think he looked good, but I also have seen him a ton of practice. Tom's seen him a ton of practice. I would tell you that that's not a good representation of what Daryl Jackson's going to be. Now, I'm not telling you he's going to be better than any defensive tackle they have. We'll see, but he's got the potential to be it, no question.
Yeah, it's a consistency thing. There were days in practice, and it's tough because you're not eligible, to play, which they mothballed that ruling right after the season was over. That's all great. There were days, Ira, where he did stupid things, like in terms of the strength. It's just people don't do that to 300-pound men. What he was capable of doing, some practices, kind of it's one-on-one drills that we like to see, or sometimes in full 11-on-11. And it reminded me of, I don't know if you've seen it or not, the Cam Newton fight video that came out the last week or so.
Like a big brother with little kids.
Yeah, Cam didn't throw a punch, and yet he controlled the whole thing. Like, that's what Daryl can do to 300-pound interior offensive linemen. So it's in there, Caleb. It's in there. Didn't see a lot of it in the Orange Bowl, but if he can summon that with consistency, he has the tools to be absolutely game-changingly dominant, I think.
And again, the comparison I would make it to is in a different light, but the situation Bob Miller was thrown into in basketball last year, where he had to sit out the whole first half of the season because of another ridiculous NCAA ruling, and then he comes back and the team's terrible, and he felt like he had to save the day. And I just think Daryl Jackson probably went into that game thinking, I'm going to do well. That's not how you play defensive line. I mean, you it's a much more you've got to play within the scheme, and you've got to do your assignments and use your technique and not rely on just your emotions. And so I think you'll see him play a lot better. Now, I would say this, though. I think Braden Fiske and Josh Farmer and Fabian Levitt were still even if he had been eligible all year, I think those three were probably still your best three defensive tackles. I think Daryl Jackson would have been a menace as the fourth guy, but I don't think he was better than any of those guys. So I don't want to build up too much. But, man, in terms of there are not a lot of human beings at his size that are as athletic and strong as he is. And so it's up to Odell Higgins to get the best out of him.
Yeah, and to see if he can do it, you're right, to that point of 50, 60 reps a game. Right. Can you be that for 50 to 60 reps? Because if he was coming in for 25 to 30 as the 4, and those guys are tired because they face the names that you mentioned, man, what Daryl would have done. And in a playoff setting, you would have seen some of that, which is a shame. But now they're looking to him to be right beside his friend Josh Farmer and see how explosive the two of them can be and disruptive they can be. It all starts again from a media perspective. Thursday morning, 6 a.m. access over there at the IPF. We have photo capabilities, video capabilities. Florida State says green light to both. Stay tuned to warchant.com, Warchant TV for the coverage of Daryl Jackson, Josh Farmer, and all the newcomers. That's what's coming up very, very soon. But what's coming up next is a review of the nuptials. Congratulations to Stephanie and Corey Clark. Your questions, see a lot of football questions today, see a lot of good ones in the chat. After 15 seconds from Russ Vorhis, we'll get to that. This is the Monday Smash presented by State Farm agent Russ Vorhis.
Contact Russ Vorhis for an auto quote today.
He's our guy, Russ Vorhis, available to serve you in the state of Florida, the state of Georgia, the state of Alabama. If you're on the East Coast, Florida, Central Florida, and you want to make a little bit of a drive, the 2 brick-and-mortar operations are in Jacksonville Beach and Orange Park. If you want more information outside of the phone numbers to contact Russ, you can go to russvorhis.com, russvorhis.com. That's Russ Vorhis. He's awesome, man. Ira, he's one of those when if you see him at a Warchant event, you're smiling saying, there's my man, Russ. And you know he's going to be bringing the thoughts on FSU football. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then the one thing I would just tell people, and we all have to have insurance in so many aspects of our life, whether it's home insurance or car insurance or boat insurance or whatever you have. And, we all shop for the best rates, and that's what, it's just what we do. We're all looking to save our hard-earned money. So definitely try to see if he's competitive with the rates. But then also the other part of it is how many of us have been in accidents or had a claim against somebody else, and then you need that customer service as well. So that's something that I think Russ really prides himself and his staff on. He really has a good staff put together. And like you said, they help Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. They've got the 2 offices in Jacksonville. So if you're over there, definitely see if you can get in there in person. But otherwise, they'll help you out online. And can't speak highly enough about Russ. I think he'll do a good job. And he's a fellow Knoll, and I think he'll treat you right.
So we had a meeting of the minds a couple of times during the reception. I got to hear about Ira's big trip. He's going to a certain theme park here in the near future. And I didn't get the full answer on the living with the land. We'll have to talk about that off the air.
Yeah.
I want to know if you're all about it or not. I sense yes. But that was because we had so many conversations because we were at the wedding. It finally happened. It did happen. They went through with it, and it was great. Congratulations. Our warmest wishes go out to Steph. I always go with the bride first, Stephanie and Corey Clark.
You're a smart man.
Outstanding celebration on Saturday. But Ira, you had 5 takeaways from the combine. How many takeaways do you have from the wedding on Saturday night, which was a lot of fun?
Man, I probably more than 5, but I don't know how many of them I can mention. I like the follow-up reports from the next day from the wedding, the lucky couple that I think maybe had some regrets about maybe some of the drinks that they had the night before, the next morning. But no, man, it was a great time. And like you said, they did a great job of putting together the party that they wanted. And I thought, their first dance was awesome. The vows were great. I don't know if anybody filmed those. I don't know if they're going to put those out or not, but Corey's got a way of being, sentimental, but funny at the same time. He was very much in a different tone. But when his father, John Clark, who he talks a lot about on the podcast, John Clark, his father, is who got Corey into FSU sports. His dad went to Florida State and was a huge Knoll, and is the guy that kind of stirred Corey's passion as a young kid. And in his father's service, when his father passed, over a decade ago, Corey was tremendous there. I mean, yeah. I spoke at my dad's funeral, and I was a blubbering mess, man. I couldn't get through a sentence, but Corey did a really good job at his, and he was great. This also one little quick thing. I was talking to one of his childhood friends, and I don't know why this is your life with Corey Clark, but this guy was asking me did I grow up wanting to cover Florida State? And I was like, no, not really, man. My family wasn't into college sports. I found college sports a little bit later in life. And he said, man, and this is a guy who's known Corey literally since they were babies, I think. He said, Corey's the only person I know that when we were all little kids and we talked about what we want to do in life, he's doing what he wanted to do in life. He always wanted to cover Florida State sports and be a sports reporter or announcer. He wanted to cover Florida State sports, and he's getting to do it. So it's a really cool, thing for him. And yeah, man, congratulations to them. It was an awesome wedding.
It was, yeah. And the after party was fun. There were trays and trays of Jello shots, and I think that
was the problem. I think
so many Jello shots. Yeah. Goodness gracious!
Also, they did the every time Corey's family and friends get together, they do a tequila shot in honor of his dad, John, and they did one of those that night too. So you never know what pushes you over the edge, but I think they both got pushed over the edge a little bit.
Well, I know it pushed me.
They weren't the only ones.
Yeah, I know it pushed me. It was the Jello shots. So yeah, but it was a fantastic time. And it's one of those deals, Ira, like you're better for having been there. And so it was a wonderful night. And again, to those of you in the chat, we saw a lot of you out there. I don't know if James B's here. He was during the JCS today, but Z-Chan, James B, among so many others, had a great time. We now have questions in the chat from nearly 300 of you here on Monday's Smash, presented by State Farm agent Russ Voorhis. Director Ben behind the scenes will be choosing these questions, and we'll address them. I saw a lot of good ones as we went flying by, but first up, Garrett PCL says and asks, in the transfer era, how do we keep Luke Kromenhoek a quarterback when he probably won't start until 2026? Seemed like a nice kid, but at the end of the day, I'm sure he wants to play sooner than later. Such is the conundrum, Ira, of every program in the country. Before the transfer portal became what it is now, quarterbacks from big-time programs left. Justin Fields was one of them. Clemson lost a couple of big-time players. We saw Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts. I mean, there are a lot of big-name players moving from place to place. What do you think about that question from Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of those two, it wouldn't surprise me if one of either he or Brock Glenn at some point left, just because that's the nature of college sports today. But I don't know that I would bet that Luke's going to definitely be the guy that leaves. I mean, I like Brock Glenn a lot, but Luke was super impressive in high school. He's a super impressive young man. They both are. I mean, they're both, again, I'm looking forward to seeing them both in practices for a full spring, and then maybe in a full season to kind of see what it looks like. Now, because Brock Glenn, I thought impressed us last spring when he enrolled, and I think he impressed us in preseason. Then he got hurt and missed some time. I liked the way, the improvement he made from the ACC Championship game to the Orange Bowl. So I think there's still a lot to like there. But Luke Kromenhoek, we have no idea what it's going to look like. And so I think that number 2 quarterback position is going to be wide open. And I don't think that Brock Glenn's probably got a slight lead, but I don't think it's going to be an insurmountable lead to where you'd say definitely Kromenhoek's going to be sitting the next 2 years. But if one of those guys wins it going into 2025, you'd like to think that they both stay at least that year, because who knows what happens. Like, whoever wins the job may not be the surefire guy. Like, I thought a mistake, a few years ago, Bailey Hockman lost the starting job in camp and then bailed like right before the season started. To me, I mean, you don't know what's going to happen. Somebody might get hurt. Somebody, just to me, if you're the number 2 quarterback, unless you only have 1 year left, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to leave. So hopefully those 2 guys will at least stay that year and then see how it plays out. But if somebody is clearly the guy, then yeah, I mean, it wouldn't shock me at all if one of them left.
Ira, he was like available to the media on Tuesday, and then he was gone on Wednesday. Like he did an interview 24 hours before he hit the road.
It was wild. So he interviewed on Tuesday. They brought all the quarterbacks to I think all the quarterbacks spoke that day. And when the interview was over and he was, said all the right things, the very next day, a friend of mine who worked in the athletics department said, "Hey, I see Bailey Hockman on the field talking on the phone. And it's like, seems like a very serious conversation." And I thought to myself, that's not probably good. And sure enough, he was gone to a junior college pretty quickly after that. I think he might have been having a heart-to-heart conversation with maybe somebody in his family or maybe a prospective coach at another school, but he was out the door.
DJU was brought in to start. I'm not trying to create a controversy where there is none, but Brock's not going to concede that, well, now I'm the backup just because DJU came in. Like that is going to be it's going to be a cutthroat battle for spring and fall. It's DJU's job to lose. Don't get me wrong, but Brock got a lot better between game 1 and game 2. That should be pretty fun to watch those reps because people are competing for everything on both lines in the 2 deep. That's what's going to make this camp fun and the fall camp that follows. Gator Kirk, how you doing, Gator Kirk? Hope things are well in your world. Who was the most improved player on offense and defense for the 2023 season? A lot of choices here off the top of my head, Ira, but I think defensively, we talked about him earlier. Jarrian Jones is probably a decent option. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Jarrian Jones is a really good one. I also think, Kalen DeLoach is a good one. And then, because I've always liked Kalen, but to go from being a good player to like an impact player that changed games, and Kalen DeLoach changed games, including a couple of huge ones. I'd put him up there. And then offensively, I'd say maybe Darius Washington. I know it's a weird go with a lineman.
Yeah.
But, Darius was a guy who was thrown into action as an offensive tackle early in his career when he wasn't ready, got hurt, had shoulder surgery, I believe, just, was kind of getting back into the flow. And then he was kind of the utility guy. And then last year he ends up becoming first team all ACC and, really had a tremendous year. So he might be my pick.
I think Darius is a great answer. And he's one of the anchors of this offensive line. We just don't know where he's going to play.
Right.
What a weird dance they're about to do in the offensive line over the next 2 camps. Thanks for the question, Gator Kirk. Next up here on Monday Smash asking questions is Hayden Guy. What's up, Hayden? Iron Tom. Over under 500 yards receiving for Kyle Morlock this year. I think he's a staple, non-rotating tight end this year, unless Landon Thomas is just insane. All right. 500 yards, Ira. What say you?
I think I'd say over. I do think he's going to have a really good season. I know you're high on Landon Thomas, but I think Kyle, if you think about, I think he ended up being the 4th leading receiver last year, and he was, probably a distant 4th in terms of targets compared to those top 3 guys. And, I think he's going to get better and better. And I think the fact that he knows the offense more now, I think there's a good chance he'll have over 500 yards. I guess the other part of it is I don't know enough. Maybe this is something Dominic Robinson could touch on one of his video breakdowns, but is DJ a tight end guy? Does he look for his tight ends? Some quarterbacks are great at that and some quarterbacks are not as great about that. I don't know about DJ to know whether or not he's a guy that's going to find his tight ends as often.
It's a good question. There's a couple of clips from the first video that was released where there's touchdowns to the tight ends in the Florida State game from 2021. We can break that down. Kyle's number, Hayden's number for Kyle is really good, Ira, because I just looked up Jaheim Bell's receiving.
Is he right around 500?
503. Now, he wasn't healthy the entirety of the season, so who knows how high that number would have gone. I am high on Landon Thomas, but I'm not in targets and yards sense. I think he's going to be a nice utility player early in his career. He loves to block. Morlock is okay at it. I think that's what he would be working on these next 2 camps to get better at, more consistent at in the blocking part of the game. But this is an offense, Ira, that I think it's going to be in some ways refreshing because the star power, at least right here, right now, isn't crazy like it was last year. So open guy is going to get the ball. Like, the open guy is going to get the ball. And I think Kyle Morlock might be open pretty often. So thank you, Hayden. Good question. I think we're both going to go over. I'll answer it. So we're both going to go over there for 500 yards for Kyle. Jane, is Akeem Dent going to be at our pro day? Can't believe he didn't get invited to the combine. Yeah, it seemed like that was a close one, Ira, in terms of the cutoff for relative ability and draftability. Too bad Akeem wasn't there because he was very, very important to what Florida State did as a secondary this past season. I got to imagine he'll be a pro day, which is a little bit later this month.
Yeah, he'll definitely be a pro day, with no question. He went to one of the Senior Bowls. He didn't go to the Senior Bowl. And he's had such an interesting career. I don't know that I've ever really covered anybody quite like Akeem Dent in the sense of a guy who comes in as a 5-star recruit, is, really one of the marquee signings Florida State had, and then plays as much as he played. I mean, he played a ton over 5 or 6 years at Florida State and played well at times. Like you said, I mean, he was an important part in the secondary the last couple of years, really parts of the last 4 years. But for whatever reason, has not, projected as a guy that they invited to the combine. And it's not like they're not aware of Akeem Dent. And so, I don't know what the big knock on him is. I don't know if maybe he's undersized as a safety. I don't know, but it's hard to imagine that he'll definitely run at the pro day. But, if you don't get invited to the combine, I mean, it seems almost very difficult to imagine you get drafted. And because there'll be a lot of guys who made it to the combine who don't get drafted. So, we'll see how it goes for him. But I thought he was, it's just weird. You don't see a lot of guys who come in with that much hype, have a good, solid career, and not do either well enough to capitalize on it and go, play at a high level in the NFL, or get disgruntled and leave. Like, he stuck it out. It's just it's a weird path he kind of took, and it was good for Florida State because he was helpful to the program.
He saw a lot of dysfunction, Ira. He saw a lot of dysfunction in his career as he got moved around back and forth and back and forth. And, this is, one thing where when you're not a coach and you're not a football lifer like Florida State staff, it's just so hard to quantify for me the safety position and the value of it. What I do know is that when Akeem Dent was not on the field this past season, it looked different and it looked worse. The secondary looked worse. I don't know if that's about pre-snap alignments, if that's about center field instincts, or a combination of the two. It's an unheralded position in a lot of ways. On a national championship team, Terrence Brooks was awfully important. Terrence Brooks wasn't talked about a whole lot, but over the top, over the middle, makes a difference. LaMarcus Brutus, shortly after the national championship season, Lamar, you're like, what's LaMarcus Brutus? He hadn't had a career like a bunch of these guys who have been drafted. And then when he was on the field, they were good. When he was,
but that's interesting. And see, to me, that's like the more normal path. LaMarcus Brutus was kind of had a similar career in terms of his impact. Like, maybe he didn't make a million plays, but you could feel the impact when he wasn't on the field. Yep. Guys weren't lined up right. There were bust assignments, but he was kind of the glue that kept it all together. But he also didn't come in as a 5-star recruit.
Yeah.
So, he would be happy with that. So it's just each of the last 2 or 3 years, I remember asking, Akeem Dent, like, are you definitely coming back next year? And kind of half expecting him to say, no, I'm not coming, or I'm not staying. I'm going to go somewhere else. And he stuck it out and was always, productive part of the team. Just didn't, he's not going to leave Florida State at the same level he came in as far as hype.
We'll see what happens. Sometimes a player like that just catches on with the right roster, and then they're the ones that have a 5 or 6 year career. It'll be interesting to document. Already been an interesting career for Akeem Dent. Thomas, good point. Yeah, we agree with you. His return, Akeem Dent's return, was when the defense really started to take off. You could see the difference. Dustin, does Braden Fiske have a chance to get picked in the first round after dominating the combine versus a lock? But it would be awesome to have 2 first-round picks that were from FSU. Yeah, I think, Ira, is it fair to say that Braden did absolutely everything he could in the last 9 months of his life to put himself in a position to get drafted in the first round? Between what he did at FSU, he did at Mobile, and then he did at the combine, has been remarkably good.
Yeah, you couldn't imagine he could do any more than he's done. I mean, he's been super productive, plays with great effort, and is tested extremely well. Not just the speed, but he put up good strength numbers too, and quickness, and all of that's great. Um, I don't know that they. And again, this is, and I'll plead ignorance when it comes to NFL draft projections because I just am not. It's not my strong suit. If we do that draft competition again, like we used to do in the past, now that there's a lot of guys, you'll see that I'm always not very good at it. So I'll start off by saying that. But I would say that it seems to me that the defensive tackles that go in the first round are usually the 330-pound freaks, and guys that are so disruptive that they're basically unblockable. Now, Braden Fiske, I think, is a phenomenal football player, but he just isn't built like that. He's 290, I think 6'4", and some change, maybe 290. I think his versatility is awesome because you saw it in the Senior Bowl. They played him at end some, and he could play a tackle, and he's obviously got the speed to do some of the outside stuff. He's a pass rusher, but I don't know that you invest first-round money in a guy that isn't going to be that monster. That's my thought, but again, man, I am not the NFL draft guy.
No, I'm only as good as the mocks that I read, and I mock the mock drafts. But just looking at the first round this year, Ira, it seems like more than a third of those 32 picks are going to be quarterbacks and wide receivers. So there's not a whole lot of room in that first round if you're not, like you're talking about, surefire 320. Doesn't mean he won't have a longer career than some of the guys that get drafted in the first round. Would be really cool, though, and it's a hell of a lot more probable than it was, again, just 3 short months ago for Brady.
And like a perfect example is like the kid from LSU. Is it Mason Smith? Is that his name?
Yeah.
It was hurt the first year. Florida State played him and didn't do a whole lot the last year. But he's just a monster of a human being. And I think that a lot of times that's going to be more attractive. I'm not saying he's going to go before Braden Fiske, but I just think that that's the measurables sometimes are hard to overcome.
Oh, yeah. And there's a middle ground. I see Josh in the chat saying if Braden doesn't move up, then what's the point?
I think he'll move up.
Yeah, he moved up. It's just that not everybody can go in the top 15, but he was Ira, I think probably a day 2 guy, round 3 or so before this process began. And now he's making a hell of a lot more money. And like he told you, I'm going to go run a fast 40, and he kept his word. A lot of dudes for Florida State keeping their word, starting with Mike Norvell saying he built it to last. And then these players down the line, they're doing exactly what they said they were going to do. Dustin, thank you for the kind wish there. Do we have any more questions from Director Ben as we're wrapping up here on the Monday Smash? There we go. Lee says, per the JCS today, do you think old batted balls Pat Payton makes the transition to elite this year? The transition to elite. Ira, are you willing to go that far that he would follow first-round quality Jermaine Johnson, Jared Verse level defensive end play?
It'll be awesome if he does. I don't know that I can predict it. The thing that bothers me a little bit about Patrick Payton, and this is not like ripping the kid, is controlling his emotions. He's a guy that he is so passionate and so emotional and that's awesome. That's a great thing. There are a lot of guys who, I mentioned before, I talked earlier about the draft a few years ago where Josh Kendo and Janaris Robinson went in the draft. Josh Kendo never struck me as a guy that was like super passionate about playing football. Like Patrick Payton is passionate about playing football, but it also, I think it's worked against him sometimes. You've seen him on the sideline. I've definitely seen him on the sidelines, kind of getting frustrated about situations, maybe a decision somebody else made or the way the game's going. And he kind of gets eaten up with that, some of that stuff. Jermaine Johnson and Jared Verse, the two guys that we'd be comparing him to, I thought were very mature. Jermaine Johnson had been, he played junior college. He'd been at the bottom of the barrel. And then he went to, Georgia and had to fight his way through that competition to get on the field. So when he got to Florida State, he was a mature human being who knew exactly why he came to Florida State and accomplished exactly what he wanted to do. Jared Verse, pretty similar. He was an under-recruited tight end, goes to Albany, then comes to Florida State, makes a really mature decision to come to Florida State. And then you saw that maturity on the field. Patrick Payton, I think if he can get that maturity and learn from those guys in that standpoint, I think the sky's the limit. I think he could be a dominant, certainly first team All ACC potential, on All America lists. But that's the one thing I think he's got to find, and part of it's age. These last 3 years, he was never as old as Jermaine Johnson. We saw Jermaine Johnson as a fifth-year senior.
Yeah.
We saw Jared Verse in his third and fourth years. Now it's a chance for Patrick Payton to show that same maturity. So that's the only reason I'm a little reluctant to predict it, but I think he could. What do you think?
Yeah, we're in agreement on that part of it. But here's what I'll say is, in watching camp, I think people can read between the lines what we're saying. In watching camp last fall, I thought, oh man, he's going to be good for a couple of 15-yard unsportsmanlikes that
Right.
you're just going to be killer. It never happened though. Like he never got dinged for anything like that. And I'm eating my own words because I put it out on the air before. I'm like, man, he needs to calm down at times because composure is so important when you're operating at a fine margin in a rivalry game. Or think about a game like Clemson, that goes to overtime. If you take a penalty in that situation at any point in that game, it could change everything about a drive or the outcome of the game. It did never happen though, which is important. And the thing that I like about Payton and old batted balls, it's not just the batted balls. He's got a really high football IQ. I remember when he rotated in his first season, he made a couple of plays. I think it was NC State on the road. Might have been Louisville, but he makes plays in the flat. Like he diagnoses what it reminded me of Bjorn Werner. Like he understands what an offense is trying to do more than just here's what my assignment is. Really smart football player, good backside pursuit. Those little things could put him in a position to get a higher draft grade. But when Jared Verse is not on the other side of you and you're the guy, you got to prove that you can do it through a double team. And I would think that teams are going to start to scheme against him.
And I think, man, the best thing that happened to Patrick Payton, and I think, and one more reason why you think it may happen for him where he takes that step to elite is bringing in Durajaye and bringing in Lolohea and bringing in Marvin Jones Jr. I mean, now and again, the young guys they had coming up as well, there's a, again, man, like it's a being surrounded by guys that are mature and are focused and, kind of hold you accountable. Because I think Jared Verse was a good guy to be on the other side with Patrick Payton. Even though Jared could get excitable, he could kind of being a steadying presence for Payton. So that's one. It's just, and it's again, you'd rather have a guy with immense talent and then have to work on that as opposed to have a guy that's not all that talented but is very mature. I just think that's kind of the last piece for him. But yeah, man, he definitely could take a big jump.
Last question here on the Monday Smash, presented by State Farm agent Russ Forhis. Do us a favor and hit the thumbs up before you leave, everybody. We appreciate you hanging with us. This was in my notes to ask you, Ira. I'm glad Charlie did instead, so thank you, Charlie. Opinion on the 2-minute warning in college football. Come on, Ira. There's only one answer here. I'm wondering if you got it.
Man, I honestly haven't given a lot of thought to it. Okay. I've been a little bit more focused on the helmet communication. One of the things I really I can't wait to talk to Mike Norvell on Thursday. I don't know if we can ask him on Thursday at the tour of duty thing or not, because it won't really be about that. It might be better before spring practice. But Mike Norvell was not a fan of the communication during the games. He didn't want the quarterbacks to have the earpieces. He likes the part of the game being the quarterbacks having to go to the line with a play and make line checks and all that. He doesn't want to see it to where they're just totally relying on their coaches. He wants quarterbacks to have to think. So I've been a little bit more focused on that one. What's where do you stand on the 2-minute warning?
I hate it. It's for the NFL. Like, Ira, if they're going to continue to stop the clock inside of 2 minutes, this is going to take forever. The end of the games. Like, if you just go full NFL and say that the clock doesn't stop on first downs inside of 2 minutes, then that's fine. There are going to be artificial comebacks in my mind until we get used to it and it becomes the norm. There's now the math out there for a comeback or a 2-minute drive in the first half, because I believe it's going to happen in both halves. The 2-minute warning.
Okay.
That, like, I just hate it. Keep it for the NFL. Keep it for the NFL and make college be about timeouts, first downs, getting up to the ball and spiking the ball. This is now a 4th timeout and a half. They already have too many commercial breaks as it is. Like, this one hurts a little bit, Ira. So
yeah, I'm probably, and this is, I guess it kind of goes back to, like the NBA has a rule where you can, if you call timeout, you advance the ball to half court.
Yeah.
And it's like some of those things that, man, should you get that really? Shouldn't you just have to go the length of the court, since that's how the sport is played? You take the ball out under the basket and that's, you have to go the length of the court. So, it's one of those, man. I guess it's more just to kind of encourage more scoring, I guess, which is what most of the rules are, seems like they're put in place to do.
Well,
I'm not a big time of game guy though. Like I'm not with football. I'm not one of these people who's like, oh, these games take too long. I mean, I have rarely been at a college football game where I thought, man, I'd rather be not watching college football in person. Yeah. So I'm not, I get it. College baseball, I'm happy that when they try to speed that up. College football, man, I'm fine with games taking a little while.
I hear you. It's just the inefficiency of the replay systems, and they've got like 4-minute breaks of the quarters. I'm like, oh, guys, this is a little excessive. But just speaking as somebody who used to be in radio and media sales, just bump up the spot rates and take the spots down. We can do that too. Wait, we can live in a world with both.
You think this has something to do with money?
Oh.
Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Just a little bit. Coming up on the channel tomorrow, a fresh edition of Seminole Headlines. I believe it will be a groomless. Is that right? Is it groomless this week on Seminole Headlines? Is it you and Jeff?
Yeah, it's just going to be a little scaled down version. Yep. Jeff and I are going to be doing it remotely just to kind of just to have a pseudo show. But yeah, it won't be the same without Corey. And but yeah, Jeff and I will do a show, and I'll put up the prompt for questions. If you go to Twitter, follow me on Twitter. I usually put up the prompt on Monday night asking for questions for an hour or two. And so we'll put that out here right when we get done with this.
Everybody give Irish Rafael a round of applause. This is his last Monday Smash for a couple of weeks because he's taking a vacation. It's spring break next week. So it's time to get a breather. We'll reconvene with Ira on Monday Smash in a couple of weeks. We'll see if we, as a staff, have one. Might be some interesting things to talk about. Obviously, the Tour of Duty on Thursday is going to be one of the headliners this week. 6 a.m.
Also, it's a big recruiting week, recruiting weekend. Not a huge recruiting weekend, but it's a good recruiting weekend. They're going to have a lot of guys on campus. So Matt's already got, as I said, he just put up a story. I have another story from him, I think, coming tomorrow. And then probably another one previewing the weekend. And then we'll have plenty of coverage. I know Ben's going to be out there helping out. Kind of another junior day kind of thing. So a lot of recruits on campus. So that may be, if you do a Monday Smash next week, maybe a little recruiting conversation.
I haven't talked to the recruiting guys in quite a while, but that's all we did, Ira, for about a month there with the portal and recruiting. Like the season, the calendar is changing college football. There's more to talk about than ever before, and that's why we're here at warchant.com and Warchant TV. Again, hit the thumbs up before you go. Thank you to everybody who's listening on the podcast tomorrow on the Warchant feed, 1 o'clock Eastern, Seminole Headlines. Ira just told you the rundown of what to expect on warchant.com during the week. We want to thank Caleb, and we want to thank Z-Chan for their contributions. But to everybody who brought questions to the table tonight, thank you for your support of us here on Warchant TV. For Director Ben behind the scenes, for Irish O'Fell, and thanks, as always, to our sponsor, State Farm agent Russ Forhis. My name is Tom Lang. This is the Monday Smash. We'll talk to you next time on Warchant TV.